maybe small in number, but I am grateful that you bothered to come out tonight for somebody that you probably hadn't heard of before you came out. A little bit of backstory on me, short and sweet. I lived here, actually lived in New Albany years and years ago, in 92 through 95, thereabout. Moved back to my home state of Texas, where I've lived since then, and got married, had kids. We decided we were going to try for a change of pace. Once my wife's contract was up in Dallas, and we wound up back here because we still had a lot of friends, a lot of folks we cared about here, and just felt like a great place to make a new start. So we've been here a little bit less than a year, and since we've been here, I have greatly appreciated this community and places like Mood where I can go and just feel instantly at home and like I fit and continue doing the things that I do. I've been writing most of my life in one facet or another, starting with poetry and song lyrics and that kind of thing, and eventually short stories and noveling fiction. And every project's been a little bit different. I know I've already talked to a few of you. Poetry's not really my usual thing, but I started off that way because I had gone through a lot of grieving and wanted to work out my grief through the process of writing poetry. And I don't consider myself a poet, and the work probably didn't hold up next to the greats, but it is a picture of how I felt in those days, and I put it out there so that hopefully it would connect with people that have gone through the same kind of losses and the same kind of heartache and that kind of thing. Then I turned my attention to some fantasy and young adult fiction, which I still have a heart for, and I'm still working on some of those things. 2018 saw Shadow Plays, which you may have seen on the table. Shadow Plays was a collection of short stories that hadn't really found a home anywhere else. It was an odd assortment, and I kind of wanted to get those things out to the world and see what they could do. And then All the Waits in the Night is my first real full-on attempt at writing horror. And because I'm me and a weirdo, I couldn't just write a horror novel. I had a lot of ideas, and none of them were novel length. So I thought, Jeff, what are you going to do with this? Well, the answer was I wrote 13 short stories. Some of them are two-parters, but I wrote 13 stories that connect, and they make a larger story that tell one larger tale. And as with almost everything that I've ever written, they connect to the larger world that I'm building. So you can read something like Shadow Plays or Tales from the Evermore, book in that series, and you'll find that there are characters that continue to come back in my work and play a part in things. Themes, places. Actually, one of the door prizes for tonight is a mug from a diner that doesn't exist anywhere except in my fiction. And but that diner's popped up in several different stories, and so I thought it's nice to have a mug with that diner's name on it. I like world building, whether I'm telling scary stories or inspiring stories or fun adventure stories. That's the part of the job that I like. Scary was not a place that I wanted to spend a year of my life in, but I've always enjoyed a good scary story. So for me, it was, how can I do this and still be me? How can I write about darkness and not get lost in it? And over the last couple of months, as I've kind of built up toward this book release, a few people have asked me, why horror? That doesn't seem like you. That's not your usual. What made you take this route? And I think the question underneath all that is why horror, especially now when the world seems like it can be a really scary place sometimes. Reality, scary enough. But for me, fiction is the place that we go to learn things about ourselves and to ask questions that maybe we don't feel comfortable asking out in the real world. We can explore things that we wouldn't necessarily explore in day-to-day conversation with neighbors. And take a deep dive into things. So while this new book is a scary book per se, I feel like there's still hope there, and there's still this understanding of, we hold on to each other in the darkness because the morning's coming, and if we hold on long enough, the morning will arrive and things will be better. Not every story has a happy ending. We know that from the world we live in, but some do. And sometimes a word of hope, a kind friend, somebody stepping up when nobody else is willing to. Sometimes those things really make all the difference in the world. And they can turn a really dark night into something that we can bear and get through. So that's why horror. I wanted to explore some of those things, and it was an interesting journey through. I'm looking forward to writing other things for sure. And if you picked up one of the cards on the table for the Christmas Cabin, that's a book I have coming in November. The Christmas Cabin is the opposite of this. It is my need to jump into the light and just enjoy and look to hopeful things. If I had to describe that, since I don't have any of it to read to you tonight, it is my love for It's a Wonderful Life and The Bishop's Wife and those classic sort of feel-good Christmas things, and it's me writing my version of that, I guess. But I am going to read to you a little bit of All That Waits in the Night. I asked my family, who is always in the middle of everything that I'm writing, so much so that they very seldom actually pick up the book. They've heard it all before. They've heard every edit, every version. But I asked them what I should read tonight, and so they helped me pick this. This is from the second story in the book called Layover. I'll preface this by saying that this story was inspired by my wife, Heidi, who, when my children were, she would have to tell me, but I know one was not quite 2, and the other, or just barely 2, and the other was a newborn. She strapped both of them onto her body and carried them to an airport and took them across the country to visit her mom and some other folks while I had stuff going on and couldn't join. And I just remember thinking, I can't even imagine doing that. Maybe that's because I'm a man. Maybe it's because I'm don't have the will that she has, but I just remember thinking that is awesome. So most of fiction begins with a what if question, and this story is no different. My question is, what if, while a mom is dragging her 2 children along on a cross-country trip, on an airplane with multiple stops, and all of that, what if that wasn't hard enough and something went wrong while she was trying to manage her children? So the story is called The Layover. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to read all of it, but I will give it a little bit of setup. Parker Lennox was not a fan of air travel. She never had been. Something about the notion of strapping herself into a hollow metal tube, packed with people, possessions, and potentially explosive fuel never sat well with her. And since her job had seldom required it, it did not become as mundane to her as it tended to with most business travelers. No, for Parker, flying was a rarity, like an honest politician or a genuine activist. When she had to fly, she did. She was a grown woman and a mother of 2, after all. She always did whatever was necessary, but she didn't have to like it. This particular flight had her nerves more threadbare than usual because she wasn't flying alone. Our toddler Seth was buckled tightly into the seat next to her, happily munching on Honey Nut Cheerios she had packed in his favorite snack cup, while 4-month-old Soleil sat in her lap. The altitude had made the infant cranky, though the pacifier had helped prevent the whale sure to disturb the entire cabin. In San Francisco, they would be picked up at the airport by Parker's mother, Justine, and her latest husband, Kyle, whom Justine hoped was the charm after her previous duo of failed marriage attempts. Before San Fran, however, came a short layover in Denver, where loaded down with 2 children and assorted carry-ons, Parker would have to find her way through an unfamiliar airport to a different terminal and plane via which she would continue her journey to the Golden State. She was wearing a hole in her bottom lip from biting on it with worry. Her anxiety wasn't helped by the knowledge yet another takeoff was ahead of her. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" the steward with a kind face asked. "Well, I'd want a drink if I didn't have to cart these 2 through the airport at Denver," she admitted. "Maybe just some ginger ale?" "Of course," he said, pouring her a beverage. "And try not to worry. They have passenger cars that you can hop aboard so you don't have to haul your things to the next gate. If there's not one waiting when we deplane, an agent at the gate desk can call one for you." "Thank you so much," Parker said, offering a kind smile. "That's one less worry." "Oh, you're very welcome," he replied, handing her the small cup of golden soda. "Your children are quite well behaved." Thanks? Please don't jinx it, though. We still have a way to go." "I'm sure they'll be fine." He tugged the beverage cart up to the next row of seats. Good luck with the rest of your journey. Parker nodded her thanks and noticed that young Seth dozed off with a piece of cereal still clenched tightly between his two fingers. She looked down and saw the baby was also asleep. Not a bad plan, she thought, pulling Sully up to her shoulder and holding her close. Mama could use a cat nap too. She allowed herself to doze, but it was an anxious sleep, filled with dreams of invasive tendrils worming their way into her mind. She attempted to run, to fight, but there wasn't enough time. There was never enough time. When she woke, the baby was restless in her arms, turning her head back and forth and crying around her pacifier. Easy, sweetie, Parker said, bringing the child's face to hers. Mama's got you. You're just hungry. Mama, Mama, Seth said, a hint of worry in his squeaky little voice. Why is baby Sully crying? Sully was the closest the young boy could get to saying his little sister's name, so Parker and her husband Matt decided not to correct him. Soleil is just upset because she's hungry, sweetheart, just like Daddy gets when he doesn't have his coffee. Coffee's a grow-up drink, Seth reminded. It's not for kids. That's right, not for kids. She took the pacifier from the baby's mouth and handed it to the toddler. Hold Soleil's binky for me while I get her bottle. She reached down to rummage through the diaper bag. Once we get some milk in her, she'll be as happy as ever. It was the stillness of the air that first gave Parker pause, followed by a sour smell that slowly settled into her taste buds. Had it been the only clue that something had gone wrong, she might have ignored it, written the feeling off as a touch of air sickness and nothing more. But the loud droning of the engine had ceased, and in that moment, distracted by her sudden nausea, she realized it had been replaced with a quiet tension, as if the world was holding its breath. Mama, Seth said, before she had a chance to sit up. He looks funny. Still bent over, she turned to find the 3-year-old pointing at a row of seats across from him. She had taken note of the man seated there when they had boarded the plane. He was middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and a polite smile. As the sole occupant of that row, he had taken the center seat to have more freedom of movement. Now, where he had been, sat something else. Parker knew that surrendering to her impulse to scream in terror would serve only to frighten her children, so she swallowed her dread and focused on processing the sight before her. It still had the shape of a man, but looked discolored and shriveled, a shell of brittle, desiccated flesh encasing an all-too human skeleton that might crumble to dust with no more force than a single breath could muster. Despite its withered appearance, she was certain it had once been the man with the salt and pepper hair, who was now very, very dead. She sat up sharply and took in the contents of the entire plane ahead of her. Everywhere she looked, it was the same withered husk where the passengers had been. She turned to glance behind her, and the story repeated itself. Her next thought was to look out the window to her left. It was impossibly bright outside, and dust whipped around in the plane, disrupting her view. The only thing clear to her in that moment was that they were no longer in the air. They had landed somewhere. Hello? She called, her voice echoing through the cabin. Hi, Seth offered. She afforded him a weak smile. Sweetheart, she told the boy, Mama needs you to do her a big boy favor. Can you do that? I'm a big boy, he insisted. I know you are. It's such a good big brother for Soleil. Can you hold her for a minute while Mama goes to check on something? I hold Sully when I kiss her goodnight, he reminded her. She likes it when I hold her, Mama, and when I kiss on her nose. I know she does, baby. But she's a little bit wiggly right now because she's hungry. So hold her tight, but not so tight you hurt her, okay? Okay, Mama. And stay in your seat, she added, unbuckling herself. Mama will come right back for you. So we can see Grandma, Seth said, his hopeful smile breaking her heart. She tucked the baby into him and put the pacifier back in her mouth. Just hold her, Seth. Mama will be right back. She reluctantly stepped away from her children and worked her way up the aisle past row after row of mummified dead. Beyond the partition that separated coach from first class, she found more corpses. At the cockpit door, she pounded loudly but heard no movement. There wasn't a man or woman left alive to help her, or to talk her down from the tower of anxiety that grew taller by the second. She and her babies were alone on a plane full of dead. That's it. That's the setup for that story. You'll find that all of the stories do, as I said, connect to tell one larger tale. Each individual story deals with a different kind of horror. At least I tried to make sure that it did. So, as I said, I appreciate all of you coming out tonight and being here for this. I do want to give away some door prizes.